Tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi ana ki a nai tahu te iwi mana whenua o konei. Ko te pokoko maturaka o, ko Stuart Brock toko ingoa, no reira, tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Stuart Brock. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this very special occasion to celebrate the promotion of Professor Vivienne Anderson to the role of Professor. These lectures are a highlight of my week, as I'm sure they are of many of you too. They're a wonderful opportunity for us to come together and listen to our new professors talk about their personal journeys, their research platform, and the impact of their research on others. I'd like to welcome colleagues, students and friends from across the university and beyond, including those joining us tonight by live stream. I would like to give a special welcome to Vivienne's family who are with us in person this evening, especially to her husband, Greg Anderson, to her daughter and son-in-law, Lydia and Anton Dunford, to her sisters, Alison Stedman, Janet Geddes, and Felicity Bright, her brother, Russell Stedman, her sister-in-law, Lurk Poe Stedman, her brother-in-law and nephew, Tony and Alex van der Weerden. I'd also like to welcome those members of her family who are joining us online tonight, especially to her father, David Stedman, and her sons, Lewis Anderson, who's joining us tonight online from New York, and to Finlay Anderson, who's joining us online from Singapore. So welcome all. It's not easy to become a professor at the University of Otago. In order to be promoted to that level, candidates need to show that they are outstanding in each of three categories: teaching, research and service. Professor Anderson has clearly met all three of these criteria. It is an honour and a privilege to congratulate her tonight for that outstanding achievement, and I hope you'll join me in doing the same right now. Now, I would clap, except I've got a microphone in my hand, so if I could ask you to clap. Thank you very much, and I hope you'll take every opportunity to do more of that this evening. Professor Anderson is Dean of the College of Education. Her research sits at the policy-practice interface and has explored questions relating to educational equity and access, educational mobility and educational pathways across a range of educational and geographical contexts. Her recent research has used multilingual, arts-based methods to examine educational barriers and enablers for young people from refugee backgrounds seeking education in New Zealand. Tonight, Professor Anderson reflects on the promise of education in contexts of displacement and resettlement, and on the structural, personal and interpersonal factors that shape and constrain educational access. She'll also tell us a little bit about her own personal journey and about the impact of her research on the profession, on her teaching, and most importantly, on her students. But before she does that, I'll hand over to Professor Karen Narron from the College of Education to formally introduce Professor Anderson and give you a little more detail about her academic background. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ka mihi nui kia koutou. What a pleasure it is to introduce Professor Vivienne Anderson. It sounds very good. And who would have thought, when I was your form teacher of 5NK, in 1987 and teaching you geography that I would be the one to introduce you as full professor in 2024, 3 decades later. This is fabulous, like it is one of the dreams come true. I love the synchronicities of life and how our paths have continued to crisscross. For those of you who don't know, I had the pleasure of supervising Viv's PhD, which explored women's experiences in internationalised higher education in Aotearoa, completed in 2008. And that was co-supervised with Jackie Leckie, and I'm saying Jackie in terms of her anthropology background because one of your commitments, Viv, is to cross-disciplinary research. And that was evident right from the start in terms of also a commitment to make positive change. So her PhD was about breaking down barriers between international and local students, and she created an innovative group called Women Across Cultures to explore how this could work, demonstrating that commitment to change, but also to kind of researching change to make sure it doesn't turn out to have unintended consequences. Since then, we've co-authored and co-supervised, and now you're my dean and my boss. And here I am introducing you on the occasion of your inaugural professorial lecture. And I know that some of you will be aware that Viv began her career in education as a primary school teacher during the 1990s and early 2000s in Christchurch. And following a stint in the USA with her partner Greg, as a new mother and categorised by US immigration as a secondary alien. Now that's quite a category. She became interested in internationalisation policy and in particular the intersections between policy, education and women's lives. Her PhD was the perfect opportunity to research these intersections and I was delighted to be one of the supervisors. Viv has worked in a range of academic roles here at the University of Otago, including as an educational researcher at the Faculty of Dentistry, then senior lecturer and academic and senior lecturer at the College of Education, so she was already with us for an earlier point in time, and then went to Higher Education Development Centre. In 2020, she returned to the College of Education as Associate Dean and was appointed as our Dean in 2022. She teaches across initial teacher education and education studies programs and is doing an outstanding job as Dean in my humble opinion, especially in amongst all of the political changes coming thick and fast from the current coalition government. And I'm looking forward to your presentation tonight because you're going to show us why education matters. So over to you.
Ko te mea tuatahi ki te rangarawa, ko te tīmatanga me te whakamutunga tēnā koe. Ki te whenua e tākoto ana, ki te awa e pūheke ana ki waho tēnā kōrua. I ngā mate kua whiturangitia, haere, haere, haere atu rā. Moi mai rā, tākoto rā i roto i te rangi Mārie. Rātou kia rātou, tātou kia tātou. Ki ngā mana whenua o tēnei takiwā, ara ko kaitahu, ko kaiterua hiki hiki, ko waitaha, ko kātimamoi, ko rapuwai, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Kia koutou, ko ngā rangatira o tākou whakaihuaka, ki tōku kaiako, ki ōku hoa mahi, ki ōku hoa, ki tōku whānau, tēnā rā koutou katoa. Ko ai au e tuaki nei, he iri ahau no Kotirana, Airani me Ingarani, i whānau mai o Tautahi, ko David awa ko Jean Stedman o Kumātua, ko Vivienne Anderson tōku ingoa, tēnā rā koutou katoa. So kia ora koutou and a very, very warm welcome to you all. I have to stick to my script not to let Bridie on a different pathway. Sorry Bridie. Thank you so much for coming. It's really overwhelming and humbling seeing you here, and yeah, just amazing seeing you here. And thank you so much to those who are joining remotely as well. It's just lovely seeing so many people who've been part of my life, and my champions and my mentors and my friends and colleagues and kids. It's awesome, so thank you. Just organise myself here. So I want to begin with this whakatauki, whaia te mātauranga hei oranga mō koutou. Seek after learning for the sake of your collective well-being. I don't want to conflate mātauranga and formal education tonight, but I love this whakatauki because it acknowledges the impact of learning or knowledge and knowledge sharing on people's collective well-being, not just the well-being of the individual. And this is really different from a view of education or knowledge sharing as simply a matter of skill acquisition or something that can be bought and sold. So many colleagues have reminded me in the lead up to this lecture that an IPL is supposed to be a celebration. But it's felt like a really heavy task preparing, and this is because there's so much to be worried about in education at present, both locally and globally. So I'm going to give a rundown. Bear with me. In Aotearoa, we're facing the introduction of laws that threaten to undermine public education. And to roll back recent progress aimed at addressing long-standing inequities. At the same time, the recently released report on the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in Care has brought into sharp relief once again how our education system has been deeply implicated in legacies of harm, particularly for Māori. Globally and locally, we're seeing a narrowing of curricula and the deprofessionalisation of teachers as governments and so-called democracies increasingly dictate the kinds of knowledge that children and young people can have access to and how it can be taught. And globally, we're seeing unprecedented levels of human displacement and disrupting educational access for millions of people. And this matters because education is critical to the development and maintenance of stable, functioning societies, healthcare and legal systems, and to the possibility of rebuilding after conflict. So given all of this, I want to acknowledge my own privilege standing here today as someone for whom education has worked, coupled with support from a family who understood our education system and also participated in it. So I'm really aware that I'm in a very privileged position being here today. So this lecture is in 3 parts, and I'm going to start just by thanking some really important people who've been very fundamental to my own personal education journey, before sharing some snippets from that journey, and it'll repeat some of what Karen's already alluded to. Then I'll talk in a little bit more depth about my more recent research. So this is my mum and dad, David and Jean Steadman. Dad was three of my siblings. So Dad was a secondary teacher, and he's unable to be here tonight, but I'm hoping he's watching online with Frank's help. Kia ora, Dad. My mum was an Otago Physio School alumna and flattered on Castle Street. So she was a true scarfie, but sadly we lost her to cancer when she was only 37 and I was 10. So these two were my first teachers. And I loved hanging out in Dad's science labs, but I should have known from the piles of late night marking that education was probably not a smart lifestyle choice. So this is my stepmum, Mary, and she was also a teacher and a great help to me and my friends with senior secondary maths. And here she is pushing my 2 oldest children in her bespoke laundry trolley. Sadly, we also lost her to cancer far too young, so she was just a little bit older than I am now. And I owe just a huge debt of gratitude to these 3 people, especially to my dad for his example of kindness, strength and faithfulness through some really difficult times. So I'd also like to acknowledge Ruth Barton, who's here. Ruth is Mary's sister, and she made the trip down from Auckland tonight to represent the older generation, which is just beautiful. And Ruth is a retired professor from an unnamed competing institution. But she's always been so encouraging about my foray into academia. So thank you, Ruth, for coming. These are my 5 siblings: Rachel, Russell, Janet, Alison and Felicity, pictured here looking fresh at the start of the Humpridge track, along with their partners and some of my nieces and nephews. So all but Rachel managed to come tonight. She's dealing with changes in the health space at a meeting in Auckland just at the moment. So these 5 have been a real constant in my life and a great source of realism and humour. So thank you guys for coming. This is my husband Greg on the right and my children, Lydia, Lewis and Finley. Greg led the way into the world of academia, and he's been my main academic mentor since I followed him mostly by accident. So thank you. These 3 kids have been incredible, and I'm just so proud of them. They've lived and breathed academia with us, they've survived it, and they've gone on their own education journeys, which is beautiful. So thank you for coming, Lydia and Anton, our bonus son, acquired more recently through Lydia. And big hugs to Lewis and Finley. They may be in bed, I don't know. Anyway, it's recorded. So since my focus is on education, I'd like to acknowledge 2 very special teachers. The one on your left is Miriama Setterington, Whaia Miriama Setterington, who's here in the front row, which is just amazing. So Miriama was my reo Māori teacher at Kashmir High School, Te Iringa o Kahukura in Ōtautahi, back in the mid-1980s. And I was one of 2 students in the school's very first reo Māori class, so me and Glenys from Ngāpuhi. And that class was just an oasis. So Miriama gave me my first education in the role of formal education as a tool for language loss, intergenerational language loss, and language revitalisation. And through her teaching, I was also a beneficiary of mātauranga, so learning grounded in te ao Māori. When I announced my decision to come teaching, Karen was no longer teaching me, but Miriama was the only teacher who was positive about going teaching, the only one. So it's been really amazing to catch up on her mahi recently through my niece Miriam, who's one of the latest of many generations who've benefited from her expertise in over 40 years of teaching. E te mārei kura, kanu i te mihi aroha ki a koe. The second teacher I want to acknowledge is Joscha Leleveld, who's watching via live stream from Malaysia. And I met Joscha much more recently in 2018 when I lost the ability to speak. So I had to have laryngeal surgery, and while waiting, I signed up for New Zealand Sign Language classes. So Joscha opened my eyes to the beautiful world of Aotearoa's 3rd official language and to the power of communications beyond words. So thank you, Joscha. So I'm now going to tell you a little bit about my education journey and how I ended up doing the research that I'm doing now. So by way of I'll just give a quick summary. My early research focused on policy and practice in the context of internationalised higher education, and later this expanded to a focus on education pathways and education mobility more generally, including in contexts of forced displacement. So alongside, my work has considered the connections between education, nationhood and belonging. So I started teaching in 1993 after major social policy reforms that saw competition introduced to public education and corporatisation to tertiary education in Aotearoa, and changes to immigration settings and education policy in many countries at the time saw a marked increase in movement across borders for international tertiary study. Excuse me. And in Aotearoa, our export education industry was born. So in the late 1990s, Greg and I moved to West Virginia for Greg to start work as an international postdoctoral scholar. And our daughter Lydia was 11 weeks old at the time. Crazy. So in the US, I was a secondary alien, we've already heard that, with no social security number or work visa. And Greg wasn't a student, but I was so lucky that there was a group run through the university that he was at for international students and scholars partners. And so this group became a really critical source of support for me and was really instrumental in shaping my research interests later. It's funny where life leads you, eh? So after 3 years, we moved back to Palmerston North for Greg to take up a second postdoc, and I started teaching again. And then we moved to Dunedin for his third postdoc, with 2 children under 5 and a third on the way. And rather than looking for another teaching role, I decided to have a go at postgrad study at the then Faculty of Education. I was really fortunate to win a scholarship that allowed me to go on to doctoral study. And so this was not a planned move by any means. So my doctoral research explored the experiences of international women students and partners of students in the context of export education. And at the time, international students' partners were really invisible in our national education policy. And I just thought I'd share a photograph of my 3 research assistants taken in the Clubs and Socks building, where they were constantly moving, so it was always blurred. Yeah. So I want to acknowledge 4 people whose work was really instrumental in shaping that early academic journey. Keith Ballard was my first lecturer when I came back to study after 10 years away, and it was his encouragement that led me to think about doing a doctorate. He said to me one day, "You know you can write," and it was just so amazing to have someone say that. Keith opened my eyes to the power of qualitative research as a way of gaining complex understandings of human social life, and his expertise in inclusive education was a huge inspiration. Karen, you've already met, and Jackie Leckie were my doctoral supervisors. Karen gave me tools to think about the role of gender, place and space in education, and I'm so lucky to keep working with you. And Jackie introduced me to anthropological and migration literatures and migration research networks, and I'm really indebted to these women for my research training. So the 4th person on this slide is Melissa Letherby, and she's currently the manager of our Disability Information and Support Service at Ōtākau Whakaihuwaka. And when I was doing my PhD, I developed a pain condition, which meant I had to switch to using voice-activated software. And it was Melissa, who was the disability advisor, who got me hooked up with everything I needed. And literally, if it wasn't for her, I would not be here today. So I'm just so grateful to that service and to Melissa for her work. So my academic journey since finishing my doctorate takes a bit of explaining, so I'll do my best. When I got near the end of my PhD, I was really worried about what I'd do next. I remember being told in careers workshops, you'll never have an academic career if you stay in the same place. And we weren't about to move, we just moved 3 times, and Greg now finally had a permanent role. So I decided I needed to be flexible in my thinking about what I would do. And I was reading the Otago Daily Times one Saturday and saw an ad for a dental education support officer, and I turned the page and then thought, oh, maybe I could do that. So I turned it back and thought I had nothing to lose, so I applied, and amazingly I got the job. So my 5-year-old son went to school the next day and said, "My mum's a dentist now." It was so easy. So I worked at the dental school till 2012. And then a lectureship came up at the College of Education, and I was really worried they wouldn't want me, but applied, and I was very lucky to get that job, so I moved over there. And I taught an initial teacher education and education studies programs, and then in 2015 moved to the university's Higher Education Development Centre. So the College of Education is the pretty one with the blossom, and the Higher Education Centre is the big house. So in there I was involved in supporting learning and teaching across the university. And then in 2021, the College of Education advertised another role, and I applied, and they very kindly took me back. So, and here I am now. So I feel so lucky to have worked with so many amazing people and just colleagues and students right across the university in these different roles. But tonight I'm just going to touch on 3 projects that link with my earlier research and the work I do now, just to kind of explain this weird trajectory that I've gone on. So in the dental school, most of my research supported curriculum development and evaluation. And one highlight that I'll just briefly talk about was the Oranga Niho project. So this was a kaupapa Māori research project funded by the New Zealand Dental Council, and it was co-led with Professor John Broughton and Tipu Ora Charitable Trust at Ohinemutu. So this is Ohinemutu Rotorua. And the project informed the development of the Oranga Niho outplacement program, where final year dental students went on placement for 6 weeks with iwi-based oral health providers around the North Island. So goals of the program were to foster mainly non-Māori dental students' competence working with whānau Māori, and to attract rangatahi to dentistry as a possible career. This project really opened my eyes to think about education and health in order to address broader systemic inequities, so to think beyond education. And it was also really opened my eyes to the significance of place and place-based relationships in education. So it was really exciting last year to discover that one of the rangatahi from Rotorua who became involved in the Oranga Niho project with us is now a dentist and Hauora Māori lecturer here at Otago Whakaihuwaka. So I'm going to give a shout out to Dr. Kuramaiki Lacey, who's watching from Ōtautahi. Tēnā koe. Yeah. After I moved to the College of Education, I was involved in another project that focused on place and education pathways, and this was the Beginning Teachers Project. So this was led, it was funded through a University of Otago research grant and co-led with Sharon Young and two research assistants, Lee Smith and Kelly Blanche, who helped us with that. So we set out to follow the return experiences of graduates of a twinned initial teacher education program. So they'd studied to be teachers in Sarawak, Malaysia and Dunedin, and then they returned and they were bonded to the Malaysian government. And we followed a small cohort of New Zealand-based graduates alongside. So the Malaysian teachers were mostly placed in underperforming rural schools in Sabah, Malaysia, and tasked with turning around student outcomes. And although novice teachers, they found themselves positioned as overseas educated experts on their return. So this research illustrated the complex work new teachers do to stay well, find enjoyment and navigate ethical and professional commitments to children and families in places shaped by particular policy expectations and requirements. And both groups of new teachers grappled with accountability requirements. Malaysian teachers had to report regularly on student outcomes while teaching in very low resource schools and incredibly complex conditions. And the New Zealand teachers were required to report student outcomes against the national standards, remember them? In some schools in ways that caused public shame to children. So based on our research, we argued for the need to pay attention to the ethical and emotional complexity of new teachers' work when policy or school directives are at odds with their beliefs about children's needs. And we also argued for the need to pay attention to the implications of place in internationalised education, how knowledge travels or doesn't, how it's translated in contexts, and how we might equip cross-border students for the complexities of return. The third project I'll talk about just briefly is the Education Journeys project, and this was a collaboration with Rachel Rafferty, a colleague in Peace and Conflict Studies who's now in Derby, and Tiffany Cohn, an Otago alumna and visiting scholar with our Centre for Global Migrations. And this was funded through the Centre for Global Migrations and a University of Otago improvement grant. So at the time, Tiffany was working at the Asian University for Women in Bangladesh, which is a philanthropic university with a commitment to educating displaced and stateless women. And our study explored the educational narratives of women engaged in international study, either as international students or as an outcome of forced migration. We were really interested in how women navigated higher education and the challenges and enablers they encountered, and in their aspirations for the future. And this was, we used biographical interviews with 37 women and 10 who were forcibly displaced. So most women foregrounded family and community as really central to their thinking about education, but the research also highlighted the different levels of risk that students take on when they engage in tertiary study. Forcibly displaced students in both contexts articulated a really heavy sense of responsibility to succeed on behalf of families and whole communities. And based on this work, we argued for the need to think about internationalised education in terms of relationality and responsibility, not just revenue generation or brand recognition, and to support students' agency as change makers for families and communities. Ensuring that our own institutional processes and practices lessen rather than increase the risks that students carry when they engage with tertiary study. So this project alerted us to some really major structural barriers in Dunedin faced by refugee background students who wanted to engage in tertiary study. And as an outcome of this project, a group of us established a collective aimed at troubleshooting some of these challenges. So I was based in the HEDC at the time. The Pathways to Tertiary Education Network is still going, and it includes University, Polytech, New Zealand Red Cross, Ministry of Education, Business South, and student representation. I think we've got one of the student representatives here somewhere. I think there she is. So initially we met monthly, and we continue to meet every school term. So in 2019, as a collective, we applied for Ministry of Education funding through a Teaching and Learning Research Initiative grant to run a project with refugee background young people in southern Aotearoa. And we were successful, and it's this project that I'll focus on for the rest of this lecture. So I'm just going to give some context before I talk about this project, and I want to acknowledge that some colleagues have heard this before, so apologies if you've heard this before. Earlier I mentioned the scale of global displacement that we're dealing with at present, and this graph is from the 2023 mid-year report from the UNHCR, and it shows the number of people forced to flee from their homes since 2009, and you can see that the number has more than doubled until 2023. So from just over 40 million in 2009 to over 110 million last year. And the forecasts this year are for an increase to 130 million people. Access to education is profoundly difficult for people who are forcibly displaced. And in 2023, around a third of forcibly displaced people were granted refugee status, so only a third, by the UNHCR. And around half of those under 18 were out of school, and only about 6% accessed secondary education. So the numbers are much worse if you include all forcibly displaced people, but there aren't stats available. New Zealand is a signatory to the 1951 Convention and 1967 Protocol relating to the status of refugees, and is one of around 37 countries internationally that accept an annual quota of refugees through the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And that's currently 1,500 people. So it's a very small number on an international scale, but New Zealand prioritises refugees who are deemed to have complex needs, or to be emergency cases, or women at risk. And we also receive a smaller number of people through asylum seeking processes, or through family reunification processes and community sponsorship programs. So when quota refugees arrive in New Zealand, they're housed in the Mangere Refugee Resettlement Centre for 5 weeks and provided with an orientation program, health checks, access to education, and so on. And following that time, they're allocated housing in designated settlement centres. So Dunedin became one in 2016 and Invercargill in 2018. And when our project began in 2020, the southern part of Te Waipounamu was the primary resettlement region for the country. So resettlement in Aotearoa is guided by this strategy document, the Refugee Resettlement Strategy, and that was refreshed last year. So this is a new version, following an extensive period of consultation. And you can see it has 5 outcomes goals, one of which is education. But refugee background students are invisible in national education policy. So education is an outcomes goal in resettlement policy, but education policy doesn't recognise the presence of former refugees, unless local Ministry of Education officers recognise people as priority learners. So this means that there's no publicly available data on refugee background students' access or outcomes to education, and institutional practices vary widely. So our study started in March 2020, alongside the first COVID-19 lockdown. Woohoo! And it was a 3-year participatory action research project. So this is a way of doing research where you work with participants to design the research as you go on, and to determine how to share the findings and what to do with them. So the project was open to any young people who'd come to New Zealand as refugees and were over 16 and based in Dunedin or Invercargill in secondary school, and wanting to engage in tertiary study. So some actually weren't currently in secondary school but wanted to engage in tertiary study. In total, we had 44 young people join the project, so 29 in Dunedin and 15 in Invercargill, and most had come to New Zealand 3 years or less before the project started. Their families had been displaced from Syria, Afghanistan, Palestine, and Colombia. So our aims were to explore with these young people how they imagined, experienced, and navigated the secondary to tertiary education transition, and the institutional practices that supported or disrupted their access to education, and how their experiences could inform teaching and support practices more widely. And this is the project team. So on the left, Joe Orangi from the University of Otago. I should make you stand up, but I won't. Amber Fraser-Smith from Otago Polytechnic. An Invercargill teacher, Glenda Atkins, is below Amber. And then on the right, my 3 amazing assistant research fellows, Ali Mostelizadeh, Alejandra Ortiz Ayala, and Anna Bergen. So awesome people. Our project revolved around regular workshops with the young people, and we planned them with them, initially on Zoom and then face-to-face once we were allowed to meet. And this is a blurred screenshot of our very first workshop held online using 3 languages across 4 cities. It was wild. So we began by asking the students to make education maps as a way of exploring with them their intended education pathways and hoped for futures. And I'm just going to share a few of them. Some students represented their future education pathways in very linear terms with clearly identified options. Others were more, revealed less certainty and more ambiguity. Most represented their educational aspirations as shaped and supported through relationships with other people and wider social commitments. And some noted the emotion work involved in navigating education in the face of really difficult life experiences. And I would note that all names here are pseudonyms. So we developed subsequent workshops based on what young people were interested in and in consultation with them. And I'll just give you a sense of some of the topics. They included educational and career pathways, part-time work opportunities and job seeking, options for funding tertiary study, application processes for tertiary study, stress and coping, study skills, and we organised field trips to different tertiary institutions. And our data included maps, photographs, film, workshop discussions, peer and one-to-one interviews. Our workshops served as a means to both generate knowledge with young people and to provide access to pathways, information and mentoring. And we also used workshops to share what we were learning through the research and to plan with them what to do with that knowledge. So without exception, young people expressed very high expectations of education in New Zealand as a pathway to a better life for themselves and their families. And some explicitly linked these expectations with promises made by UN agents and staff at Mangere. For example, anyone can go to university with or without documentation, gaps in schooling don't matter. In practice, young people's education pathways were mostly non-linear as they negotiated challenges associated with settling in a new place, variable levels of institutional support, pathways guidance, resettlement support, access to specialist language teaching, and New Zealand's profoundly complex and disconnected educational infrastructure. So think NCEA, StudyLink, zero fees, institutional admissions and enrolment processes, none of which connect. Alongside, gaps in wider social services impacted on many young people's access to education. So some left education to care for unwell caregivers, some managed household budgets and tenancy agreements while trying to study, and many had to skip school at times or leave school altogether to act as interpreters for family members. Young people made connections between structural factors, school practices, peer interactions, and a sense of belonging or unbelonging in Aotearoa. Teachers and school leaders communicated unwelcome by conflating English language proficiency with academic capability, excluding English language learners from classroom or extracurricular activities, failing to take bullying seriously, and in 2 cases refusing enrolment. Where young people were refused access to school, lack of access to education or to English language pathways outside school limited access to other options. So 2 young people made a really explicit connection between this and a wider sense of national belonging. Daniel said, "We don't feel we belong here. We feel this place is not for us. We don't deserve to be here." And Whitney, who was unable to access education through our whole project, suggested that for 18 and 19-year-olds, resettlement in Aotearoa might actually cause harm. On the other hand, young people associated a sense of welcome with support from mentors, new friends and allies, classroom activities that fostered connection, staff who took students' academic aspirations seriously, responsive, flexible teaching that supported access to learning, accommodations for non-linear pathways, and timely, appropriate navigational support. So this is some of the work that we've published based on this project, and I'll just summarise some of our key learning. So our research really highlighted the sheer grit and resourcefulness required of young people who are former refugees trying to navigate New Zealand's complex educational landscape at the secondary tertiary education border while managing the many other challenges associated with displacement and resettlement. And we argue that a competitive assessment-focused schooling system at senior secondary level may work against inclusive practices and create risks for young people when coupled with gaps in wider social infrastructure, limited pathways options, and a really, really complex tertiary education environment that relies on access to electronic infrastructure as well. So we've argued for the need to address policy gaps that render refugee background students invisible in education and that leave much to chance for people who want to engage in education. And we've noted that, ironically, New Zealand may be meeting its promises as a signatory to the Refugee Convention and according to refugees the same treatment as is accorded to nationals, because we know that we've got long-standing evidence of inequities for many groups within Aotearoa. But we argue that in the face of structural barriers, individual teachers, school leaders and tertiary education staff play a really critical role in enabling or disrupting students' access to education and education pathways, and micro-level interactions in education settings broker a broader sense of belonging or not belonging in contexts of resettlement. So a highlight of the project was the creation of this full-length documentary film. And I can't see Ali, but I know he's here. This was Not Just Dreams, and it was the most amazing piece of work led by Ali Mostelizadeh in collaboration with the film crew, a group of our young people who co-created the film with Ali, and some of whom are here. So the film was funded by our grant with additional funding from the Centre for Global Migrations and UNESCO, and we premiered the film in Dunedin and Invercargill at the end of 2022. Awesome event. These are some of the crew and stars, along with blurred photographs of family members and friends at the Invercargill premiere. So I wish we could have just had the film here tonight instead of an IPL, but it's a bit long. And I would say we're working on submitting it for film festival release. So if anyone wants to bankroll it, see me later. So I've really enjoyed this different experience of communicating research, and I really need to thank Ali for his expertise in this work, and Puna, who supported our trips to Invercargill. We've shared excerpts of this film with students in initial teacher education, and my wonderful colleague and Otago alumna, Dr. Mariam Abdul Daim, is utilising it as a professional development tool nationally through the Ministry of Education, which is really exciting. So I want to conclude by returning to the whakatauki that I shared at the start of this lecture. This is the last slide, you can all breathe. Whaia te mātauranga, hei oranga mō koutou. So this image was taken at Aurora College, which was our host school in Invercargill. And the words say manakitia, whānau and family, which are really appropriate to go back to as I close this off. And just a few final reflections. So in this piece that I wrote with Zoe Bristow, a former colleague in Hauora Māori here at Otago, we thought about how mātauranga might help us to think differently about internationalised education in ways that respond to the many challenges facing our world. We drew on 3 questions that Charles Royal argues are central to mātauranga. Who am I? What is this world that I exist in? And what am I to do? We considered how practices in education might look differently if we took seriously values drawn from mātauranga, such as kaitiakitanga, manaakitanga and whanaungatanga, including the role of education to strengthen relationships that sustain life. And contributors to this book, which I co-edited with Henry Johnson, provided some insights into what this might look like in practice. For example, by examining the histories that shape contemporary education, attending to rights, resources and relationships in education settings, and utilising teaching practices that affirm and sustain home languages. And I'm currently working with Pacific colleagues from Te Kete Aronui, one of them's up there, to think about this in terms of le vā, so ideas of relationality drawn from broader Oceania. So I look forward to seeing what you do, Jess, in your role as Deputy Vice-Chancellor External Engagement. The university's recent tuakiritaka work is, I think, a really hopeful mātauranga-based reorientation that places whenua and mana whenua at the centre as grounds for ethical external engagement, and I'm really interested to see what that looks like moving forward. So for now, sincere thanks to all of you for being part of my educational collective, for your encouragement, collegiality, and for coming along tonight. And I want to acknowledge all of my research collaborators who I haven't named tonight, and my amazing postgrad, doctoral, summer and coursework students, and my many research participants as well. And I just want to also especially thank my amazing staff from Te Kura Ako Taitoka, and ahu te mātauranga down in Waihopai who are watching this over dinner. I wish I could have been with you guys. So thank you for reminding me daily that this was coming up and for coming along tonight. Nō reira koutou mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Sorry, the eyesight's going. O tēnā koutou katoa, kia ora tātou. I te manakura o te kite aranui au, engari I nai nei ko te pau koko o te ringa toro ahau. Ko te sakapanga tōku ingoa. I get the privilege granted to me by the current Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Humanities, Professor Hugh Campbell, of giving the vote of confidence or vote of thanks to Viv. Confidence and thanks, easily. So I'm currently the DVC of External Engagement. For those of you who don't know me, I just recently moved into that role, and for the last 3.5 years I've been the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Humanities, which is the division in which the College of Education sits. So I have had the wonderful pleasure of working closely with Viv through these last few years, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that soon. So Viv, one of the things I do when I do these, and this is quite emotional because it's my last one, but it's particularly emotional because it's you. But I normally ask for an advance copy of the lecture, which is exactly what happened with this one. And Viv emailed and she said, I always just thought you got up and gave those thanks for, just I said, no, I do read them ahead. But sometimes I prepare my thanks ahead of time, and I therefore kind of go with the head. And sometimes I choose to go with the heart, and it just depends. But tonight, I chose not to prepare my notes ahead and to go with the heart. And having sat there and listening and realising what I've come out with, I can see why. So I want to, in my vote of thanks, comment on 3 aspects of Viv as a professor, as a person and as a leader. So first of all, as a professor, the purpose of IPLs is partly to embrace and thank and acknowledge and share your journey, and she did that beautifully. But the other aspect of the IPL traditionally, in days long gone by, it was meant to be a kind of public proof of the fact that you were good enough to be a professor. And at that stage, all we meant by professor back in those dark days was that you were a superb researcher. Thankfully, our criteria for that has broadened to teaching and to service, which you saw. But I want to just make that point that I think you proved that well to us, right? So it was a wonderful IPL, but we got to see clearly that you are absolutely, obviously, and without a doubt, a stellar researcher, and that the research you're doing is incredibly valuable. And so the first thing I wanted to just comment on, Viv, was that you have shown in your research that you are a fierce advocate, and not all researchers are. We can have great researchers, and you can be great for lots of reasons, but Viv, I just want to acknowledge and affirm that your research is about fighting for or pursuing something important to us. And when you think about what academics are meant to do, we often hear, the lawyers in the room will always tell you that the statute says we're meant to be the critic and conscience of society. And I think we saw that beautifully displayed tonight, that is what Viv does. And I have so appreciated, as I know your colleagues in the college have, particularly while you've been Dean, your willingness to step into some very public debates right now about education and what matters. And what was beautiful from that talk was that we can see that has been a theme in your research since day one, that you believe absolutely in the value of education beyond it being a good. It's not, and you said this at the beginning, it's not something that can be bought and sold. And for those of us who sit in the clock tower trying to figure out how to cover the costs of this place, it's a good thing to be reminded of, right? It isn't something that merely can be bought and sold. And secondly, you said it's not just about skill acquisition. We're not in the business here or in the activity here of just getting people ready for jobs. That's not what education is about. It's about liberty and freedom and doing the best for our neighbours. And I think we could see that come through so strongly. So Viv, thank you and well done. Secondly, and this carries on from that point and watching her demonstrate that, Viv's research, as is everything she does, is motivated by a deep care and empathy for people at heart. You can see in Viv so clearly that question, he aha te mea nui, being answered so loudly and proudly, right? It's about people. And she has this huge sense of care for people, and people matter to her. And you can see in her research that is always at the heart of it, the question that she's really asking. What can we do better to serve the other? Bravo, Viv. The other thing I like about that, and I have seen glimpses of this when I have talked to some of her students, and when I've seen some things that have had to come through to me that she's worked on, that the other wonderful thing about that care and empathy you have for people, Viv, is that you live out that sense of true teachers being those who are learners alongside their tauira. And I think that huge project where it was about designing the research with the subjects, and she didn't even use the word subjects because that's not what they are, right? They're people. But that's a great example of you living that out. You are here to learn from others just as much as you're here to teach them. So again, bravo, Viv. And then thirdly, I wanted to comment on Viv's leadership. So one of the important overlying qualities to now be promoted to professor is that you need to be a leader in all of those three fields. You need to show leadership in your research and your teaching and in your service. And she has done that well and truly. But I just wanted to comment on what has been the most obvious demonstration of her leadership in the last couple of years, and that has been as Dean of the College of Education. I have seen in you, Viv, an incredible determination to do well and to do right by your college. and your staff, and to do that in the midst of incredible challenges externally, politically, but also internally, when we've had to figure out how to make the numbers work to get what we're really trying to do here. And secondly, Viv, you have done that in a deeply human way. So your colleagues and your staff see you not just as a leader, they see you as a friend, they see you as a confidant, and they see you as an advocate. And I think, and I don't think you'd mind me saying this, we have lots of one-on-ones as I'm her direct boss, or was for a while, and in those one-on-ones you have shown the deeply human side. You know, there have been moments where she has been incredibly excited and happy and loving the job. And then there have been the other moments. And we have cried and together and separately, and she has raged about some things and she has pushed back against me. And we have always tried to find the right answer together. And I think that is much to your credit. You feel your leadership as much as you think it. And I think your colleagues in the college are all the better for it. So you lead with heart and head, and I want to thank you. And I thought I'd just quickly share, she knows this because I made the point of telling her, but it's nice for the rest of you to know. In part of being PVC, and I appoint, or what I used to, so I need to talk in the past tense, I appointed academic leaders regularly of programs and of colleges. And so we appointed Viv as Dean 2022. And very recently we discussed whether she wanted to stay on or not. And there was a bit of back and forward, not being sure, particularly given all the challenges, but she decided she would. And I then went to the college and sent them an email and said, this is what I'm proposing. I think she's a stellar leader. I need your feedback. What do you think? And I do this with all the units or departments that I appoint leaders for. But what was wonderful, and I told Viv this, what was wonderful was how quickly and how loud and how positive that feedback was. So Viv, you know, your colleagues are definite about their affirmation of your leadership. They are so proud that you are their dean, and they're incredibly grateful for the work that you've been doing with them. And I'm looking over at them because I know that's the case. I want to thank you, our kaimahi of the college, for your commitment to the college, for your commitment to education, particularly in the face of so many challenges at the moment. And I want to thank you for your support of Viv. I know in a sense it's easily won because she's a wonderful leader, but it is also, you know, it's hard fought to keep it going in this stage. So I want to thank you all for your commitment to education and to ITE in this current landscape that we're in. So, nō reira, whakamihi kia koe, ahorangi, Vivienne Anderson. Ka mihi nua kia koe mō ta mahi me mō ta whaikorero tēnei pō. You are a treasure. You are a taonga for us. I have the pleasure of presenting you with a gift and a memento of this evening as a small sign of our appreciation. And it's so much fun having an interpreter with us. Thank you. It's been wonderful. To the audience, both online and here in person, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for those of you who have come, kanohi ki te kanohi. It's lovely to share and fellowship with you. And to those online, wherever you are, we appreciate you zooming in. So for those of you who are here in person, we would love you to come over with us. So haere mai for some cup of tea, some kai, and some time to celebrate with Viv and her family. Please do come with us. It's in the staff club, just across. It's not too far, and stay for some time of fellowship with us. So, thank you. Thank you, one. Thank you all. Thank you for your commitment to education. Thank you for being here to support this wonderful colleague, and have a lovely evening. Pō Mārie.